Happy Darwin Day, belatedly. Now I'll share my screen with you. Okay, my topic is Darwin's views about group selection, with some conceptual clarification along the way. Here are the list of topics I want to talk about. I'll start with a controversy about group selection that began in the 1960s, which will allow me to introduce some of the basic concepts that need to be in place to understand it. And then I'll talk about some examples from Darwin's own work concerning the concept of group selection, which I'll then summarize. And then I'll talk about why group selection looked like a big mistake in the context of the controversy that took place beginning in the 1960s about that topic. So, in the 1960s, the idea of group selection came under serious attack in evolutionary biology. And initially, the attack was extremely successful. But in the 1970s, a rival position developed called multi-level selection theory, which held that group selection is one kind of natural selection. It's a legitimate hypothesis, and it needs to be tested like any other hypothesis concerning evolution, concerning natural selection. And the upshot of this history is that right now, I think there are two camps in evolutionary biology. One is still living in the 1960s, so to speak, where they think that group selection is a big mistake as an idea. And the other, the multi-level selection people who think group selection is true in some cases, false in others, and in any event, it needs to be considered in lots of contexts. So what about Darwin's views on group selection? And here I have quotations from three very influential figures, two of them historians, one a biologist, who are all saying that Darwin hated the idea of group selection. He was resolutely committed to the idea that the only thing that matters in evolution by natural selection is individual level selection. Dawkins, of course, is the author of The Selfish Gene, and he sees Darwin as a sort of predecessor to his own conception of how evolution by natural selection should be understood. Cronin and Roos are both historians and philosophers. Some terminology. Individual selection means selection within groups, where selection will favor traits that are better for the individual over traits that are worse. Group selection means selection among groups, where selection favors traits that are better for the group over traits that are worse. And here, better and worse are to be understood strictly in terms of their effects on, of the traits' effects on fitness. That is, for an organism, the organism's ability to survive and reproduce. For groups, the group's ability to avoid extinction and to also send out daughter groups and found new colonies. And the standard example of a pair of traits that came under discussion in connection with individual selection and group selection, starting with Darwin and continuing into the 1960s and up to the present, are the traits of altruism and selfishness. So I now need to describe to you what these words mean, not in ordinary English, but in the context of evolutionary biology and how they use these words. So both these words are used to describe the effects of a trait on the survival and reproduction of an organism, that is, on the organism's fitness. It has nothing to do with how the individual organism thinks about what it's doing, how it feels. According to this terminology, a mindless organism can be an altruist. It'll have a trait that helps other individuals at cost to self. And given this terminology, you can see that in the process of evolution by natural selection, individuals do better by being selfish, but groups do better when they contain altruists. Selfishness is good for the individual because the selfish individual isn't giving away resources to others. but it possibly could receive resources from the altruists in its neighborhood. Selfish, that's selfish individual. Altruists are sacrificing their own fitness and promoting the fitness of others. And here's a way of thinking about the evolution on the fitness relationships between altruism and selfishness. You see here that this is the percentage of selfish individuals in the group. It goes from 0 to 100. And you see immediately that regardless of how common or rare selfishness and altruism are in the group, S individuals are always fitter than A individuals. First point. Second point is that the more selfish individuals there are in the group, the lower the fitness of everybody, selfish and altruistic individuals. And to put that same point in different words, the more altruists there are in the group as we move in this direction, notice that both altruist and selfish individuals do better and better in terms of their fitness. What about this red line that's labeled W? That represents the average fitness of individuals in a group. When everybody is selfish, that's the average fitness of the individuals in the group. When everybody is altruistic, that's the average fitness of individuals in the group. And when the group is 50% altruistic, 50% selfish, the W line is halfway between the A line and the S line. So individual selection is selection within groups. Group selection is selection among groups. Individual selection favors selfishness. It's pushing for selfishness to increase. Group selection favors altruism. It's pushing in the opposite direction. It's pushing for altruism to increase in frequency. And where there is fitness variation of altruism and selfishness, both within groups and among groups, you have both individual and group selection occurring at the same time. Well, here are the three examples that I'll want to talk about from Darwin. And in each case, Darwin is thinking about traits as being selfish. Hold on. Sorry about that. In each case, he's thinking about the trait in question being altruistic. So let's get started. Here's a magnified photograph of the barbed stinger of a honeybee. Darwin uses the phrase backwards serratures to describe this barbed configuration. This is what he says about that. He asks a question. Can we consider the sting of the wasp or the bee as perfect, which when used against many attacking animals cannot be withdrawn owing to the backward serratures, and so inevitably causes the death of the insect by tearing out its viscera? How could this barbed stinger be present in these organisms if it harms the organism to have this barbed stinger? And here is his answer. If on the whole, the power of stinging be useful to the community, it will fulfill all the requirements of natural selection, though it may cause the death of some few members. So here's a first simple example of where Darwin is saying, we see something in nature. It is not beneficial to the organism that has the trait, that has the barbed stinger. Why is it there? Because it's good for the group, that a nest that contains honeybees with barbed stingers will do better than a nest that contains honeybees with barbless stingers, with no barbed stinger at all. It's good for the group to have a barbed stinger, have individuals with barbed stingers in it. Here's a famous example, not from Darwin's 1859 book, The Origin of Species. This is from his 1872, I think, book, The Descent of Man. And he's raising here a question about understanding human evolution. That's what this whole book is about. And he's particularly interested in a feature of moral codes that seem to be pretty much universal across societies, and he thought historically were in presence for a long time among human beings. He says, it's extremely doubtful whether the offspring of the more sympathetic and benevolent parents, or of those which were the most faithful to their comrades, would be reared in greater number than the children of selfish and treacherous parents of the same tribe. He who was ready to sacrifice his life, as many a savage has been, rather than betray his comrades, would often leave no offspring to inherit his noble nature. The bravest men who were always willing to come to the front in war and who freely risked their lives for others would, on an average, perish in larger number than other men. So why, Darwin is asking, well, he's noting that individuals who are altruistic in a context of warfare, who are sacrificing their own welfare, sacrificing their own life for the good of the group, these individuals are going to survive and reproduce less successfully than individuals who are selfish, who don't do that. So why do we see that trait present in human populations, in code and embodied in many moral codes, all moral codes maybe, that human societies have had? And here is his explanation of why this trait evolved in human evolution. He says, although a high standard of morality gives but a slight or no advantage to each individual man and his children over the other men of the same tribe, yet that an increase in the number of well-endowed men and an advancement in the standard of morality will certainly give an immense advantage to one tribe over another. A tribe including many members who, from possessing in high degree the spirit of patriotism, fidelity, obedience, courage, and sympathy, were always ready to aid one another and to sacrifice themselves for the common good, would be victorious over most other tribes. And this would be natural selection. And here he makes a claim about human history. At all times throughout the world, tribes have supplanted other tribes. And as morality is one important element in their success, the standard of morality and the number of well-endowed men will thus everywhere tend to rise and increase. So self-sacrifice is disadvantageous to the individual, but good for the group. And the reason we find this altruistic traits in human societies now is that there's been a selection process in our history where groups are competing with other groups in warfare. The third example is a bit more intricate than the two I just described, but again, he's talking about an altruistic trait. The case that in many social insects, there are workers, wasps, bees, and so on, that are sterile. Why would that trait be present in these social insects? And Darwin says in The Origin of Species, this is by far the most serious special difficulty which my theory has encountered. It really puzzled him and really stopped him in his research for more than a year thinking about this. And you can see why it's a big puzzle. How can a trait evolve by natural selection if individuals with the trait cannot pass it along to their offspring? And that's what it is to be sterile. In other words, sterility automatically means a fitness of 0. So why do we see this trait? Darwin began to figure out a solution to this problem by an analogy. He thought about artificial selection, the activity of plant and animal breeders who choose the individuals who will be the parents of the next generation. And he thought about the following fact. Suppose you have beef cattle and you're trying to improve the flavor of the beef that they produce. You take an organism, kill it, you cook the meat, and you decide how well it tastes. And you say, oh, that's good. I want that trait. I want that individual to produce offspring who will have the same tasty flavor meat. Well, the problem is you just killed that individual. So what do? Well, plant and animal breeders will solve this problem by choosing the parents of the cattle with the best meat to be the parents of the next generation. And Darwin's idea is that this is the way to think about how sterility can evolve. To understand the evolution of sterile workers and of tasty beef, don't think about the sterile workers or the slaughtered cattle. They're dead ends. They're gone. Their fitness is zero now, right? What you got to do is think about the parents that produce that tasty beef that you just tasted, and the parents who produce offspring, some of whom are sterile. That was the key idea that got him started. I haven't mentioned group selection yet. Here we go. So let's think about two strategies that a female insect could use in producing offspring. One strategy is to have 10 fertile offspring. We'll call that the all-F strategy. And the other strategy that a female could use is to produce 10 offspring, 9 of which are fertile and 1 is sterile. And we'll call that the mixer strategy. So fertile individuals reproduce, sterile individuals help others in the nest to rear their offspring. So the key here is the sterile individuals aren't just sitting there doing nothing but being sterile. No, in addition, they're helping other individuals in the nest to be successful reproductively. So now we're going to imagine, just to get a simple picture of how this is going to play out in evolution, we're going to think of a bunch of different nests, each of which is founded by 2 females. Each is going to lay 10 eggs in the nest. And so they're going to be 20 eggs there who will hatch and then develop. There are 3 kinds of nests that could exist in this ensemble of nests. You can have a nest that's founded by 2 mixers, a nest that's founded by 1 mixer and 1 all-F female, and finally a nest that's founded by 2 all-F females. Okay, 3 kinds of nests. Let's think about them, and we'll think about this. I need to pause again, excuse me. Okay, so let's think about these 3 kinds of nests. And we'll start with the question, what's going on inside of those nests? Well, there's no individual selection of 2 of them because you don't have any variation there. They're the 2 mixers. They have the same trait. The 2 all-F nests, they have the same trait. Those founding females have the same trait. What happens in the case in which a mixer is laying eggs next to an all-F female, an all-F individual? Well, in that 50-50 nest, mixer's sterile offspring are helping her own siblings and also the offspring of the all-F female who helped found the nest. Whereas the offspring of the all-F female aren't helping anybody. So what's going on here in this case, it shows you that mixer is an altruistic trait because it's creating a sterile offspring who then is going to help others. So the mixer is sacrificing a bit of wealth, is paying a cost in having fewer fertile offspring, and is providing a benefit to the nest as a whole. And the all-F trait is selfish. Its offspring are just going to go ahead and reproduce without helping anybody. Okay. So within nests, there is no individual selection in 2 of those kinds of nests, and there's individual selection favoring the all-F strategy over the mixer because the all-F individual is selfish and the mixer is altruistic. And here is the key thing. Between nests will differ in their productivity, and the more mixers there are in the nest, the more productive the nest will be. So we got to focus on the idea that that sterile offspring that is one of the offspring of a mixer female is helping others to reproduce in a way, so to speak, that more than compensates for the fact that it's not reproducing at all. And that's why the mixer strategy will be favored by group selection. And here's that's just to give you the picture of how it works. And here's Darwin's sort of abbreviated picture of what's the right way to think about this interesting problem. He says, with sterile neuter insects, we have reason to believe that modifications in their structure and fertility have been slowly accumulated by natural selection. How? From an advantage having been thus indirectly given to the community to which they belong over other communities of the same species. So once again, we have group selection at work. I wanted to mention a fourth example that's not about altruism and selfishness that Darwin talks about. And this is the book about human evolution. He's talking about technological innovation. Here are his words. Now, if some one man in a tribe, more sagacious than the others, invented a new snare or weapon or other means of attack or defense, the plainest self-interest would prompt the other members to imitate him, and all would thus profit. If the new invention were an important one, the tribe would increase in number, spread, and supplant other tribes. And there you see group selection is at work. What's interesting about this example conceptually is that being an innovator in this story that Darwin's imagining is not really altruistic. It's not altruistic if innovators in a tribe are fitter than non-innovators. So imagine that if you're a technological innovator, you have prestige, you also have first use of the technology that you create. So you benefit by being an innovator, but at the same time, the group you're in benefits as well. So this is a trait that is good for the group and also good for the individual. It's not, and that's why it's not altruistic. Here's the fitness representation of altruism and selfishness. Darwin's story about technological innovation looks like this, where innovators are fitter than non-innovators, and groups do better the more innovators they contain. Okay, so here's the big picture. Darwin thought that group selection was important, though he didn't think it explains everything. Many traits, according to him, evolved because of individual selection alone. Darwin thought that altruistic traits evolved because of group selection, though he thought that non-altruistic traits sometimes also evolved by group selection. And he thought specifically about our own species, that group selection has been very important in the process of human evolution the last 6 million years. So let's go back to the 1960s. Why was there such a strong reaction against the idea of group selection? It was regarded not just as factually mistaken, it was regarded as confused, a kind of unscientific, woolly thinking that just needed to be driven out of the science. It was not real science. There are a couple of reasons that I want to mention. One of them, I'll just call it's the failure to understand Simpson's paradox. And this is an idea that is not specifically about evolutionary biology, though as you'll see, it has an application. So this is an idea from statistics, which I'll now explain to you by talking about a famous real-world example, namely the case of the case of sex discrimination at the University of California at Berkeley in the 1970s. Now, here's what happened. What was observed was that the percentage of women admitted to graduate school at Berkeley was substantially lower than the percentage of men who were admitted. And a hypothesis that was obviously something to consider is that the departments were discriminating against women. But the surprise was that when the administration looked at departments at the university one by one, they noticed that there was no discrimination, that in each department, the percentage of women who were admitted was pretty much the same as the percentage of men who were admitted. So how could this have happened if women are getting in less frequently than men, and yet there's no discrimination? What's going on here? So I'm going to make up a simple example to illustrate it. I made up these numbers, and I'm going to consider a university that has just 2 academic departments, just to keep it simple. So imagine that 1,000 women apply to graduate school, 900 apply to the first department, 100 apply to the second, and 1,000 men apply to the two departments as shown. And suppose the departments have different admission rates. Within each department, women have the same chance of getting in as men, but it's harder to get into department D1 because they only accept 20% of the applicants. Easier to get into department D2, they admit 40%. Well, if you put these two tables together, you get this result about the number of individuals admitted. If you multiply 20% by 100, you get 20 men getting into D1. If you take 900, or you take 100 women applying to Department D2, 40 of them get in. And you'll notice here that though the applicant pool is 50% male, 50% female, 360 men got into Berkeley, whereas only 220 got into Berkeley. So this is an example of Simpson's paradox. How could this happen? Well, there's a correlation here between being male and applying to departments that are easier to get into, and being female and applying to departments that are harder to get into. It's because of that correlation that the failure of discrimination within departments can yield the result that the frequency of men admitted exceeded the frequency of women admitted. Okay, so that's a simple example of Simpson's paradox. Here's an application of it to a simple example of evolution by natural selection, where the two traits are altruism and selfishness. Suppose we have two groups. There are 100 individuals in group 1, 100 in group 2. Group 1 is mostly altruistic. Group 2 is mostly selfish. Suppose these are the number of babies that each of these individuals will have, well, assuming these are asexual organisms. If you're selfish and you live with a lot of altruists, you're in group 1, you have 4 babies because some of those altruists are helping you. If you're an altruist living in group 1, you have 3. If you're a selfish individual in group 2, you have 2 babies. You're an altruist in that group. You have 1 baby. Notice that within group, selfish individuals are fitter than altruists. 4 is bigger than 3, 2 is bigger than 1. But now let's look at how many offspring there are in the next generation. So how many altruists will there be in the next generation from group 1? We have 90 altruists. They each have 3 babies. You have 270 altruists in the next generation in group 1. And what you notice here is that although the two groups together started at 50% altruist, 50% selfish, in the next generation, you have 280 altruists and 220 selfish individuals. So the frequency of altruism has increased, even though within each group, altruism is at a selective disadvantage compared to the selfish individuals in the same group. How could this happen? Well, there's a correlation in this example between being altruistic and living with lots of altruists. If you're an altruist, you're probably in group 1. If you're a selfish individual, you're probably in group 2. And it's because of that correlation that you get Simpson's paradox in that example also. And so the paradox was not understood, and so people thought it's impossible for altruism to evolve. because they think by definition altruists are less fit than selfish individuals. So how could selection make anything other than the extinction of altruism occur? And there's an argument that sort of codifies that I hope you'll see it, and I hope you'll see it in relationship to Simpson's paradox. I think this argument had a big impact on people, and it was given this name from Dawkins, and you'll see where the political phrase "subversion from within" comes into it. So here's the argument: by definition, altruists are less fit than selfish individuals. When selection controls the evolutionary process, fitter traits increase in frequency and less fit traits decline. Therefore, altruism cannot evolve by natural selection. And if it can't evolve by natural selection, it can't evolve by group selection either. So I think this simple argument made people think that it's ridiculous to bring in group selection to explain altruism. Altruism is impossible. There's something wrong with this argument. First of all, this statement here is false. What's true is close, but it's a different statement, is that altruists are less fit than selfish individuals in the same group. What doesn't have to be true by definition is that when you average across groups, that altruists are on average less fit than selfish individuals. And in the Simpson's paradox example in the previous slide, there was an example in which the altruist trait was fitter than the selfish trait when you average across those two groups. Okay, let me summarize what I've been saying to you. Darwin certainly endorsed group selection hypotheses, contrary to what Helena Cronin, Richard Dawkins, and Michael Roos were saying. And then to understand the concept, mindless organisms can be evolutionary altruists. Altruism is the main example that led biologists to consider group selection hypotheses, including Darwin, but group selection can cause non-altruistic traits to evolve. They're interesting too. And the definitions of altruism and selfishness might suggest that natural selection cannot cause altruism to evolve, but this is a mistake. And finally, the failure to understand Simpson's paradox was one of the reasons that people thought group selection can't cause altruism to evolve. So thank you for your attention.